The first standard musket the United States ever issued was given by the French that shoots a lead ball about the width of your thumb. But borrowing from France wasn't going to be forever, and America needed to build its own. So they did. The Model 1795 was a near copy of the same flintlock. The problem was that dozens of contractors were building the same gun, and each built it a little differently, so parts from one gun often wouldn't fit another. And that single problem is what the next musket was designed to fix. So the Harper's Ferry Model 1803 was that solution. It's a shorter flintlock, the first of its kind to have rifled barrel grooves to level up the accuracy, and up the stopping power with a bigger lead ball for skirmishes. That became the first ever standardized rifle. The only thing changed was, per Thomas Jefferson, to make them more interchangeable. But it was close. The 1816 had taken the flintlock musket about as far as it could go. And the next change wouldn't be the gun at all. It would be the way it fired. That change was the percussion cap invented by this guy Joshua Shaw. This time, on the US Model 1842, the percussion cap goes here, you load the powder, then you load the ball. Pull the hammer back and shoots instantly without the weight. This basically ended the flintlock era. Even though the effective range still sucked, it would help if it had a sight, but it was far more reliable, where flintlock fired maybe 6 times out of 10, while the cap pushed that to about 9. And it worked, even in the rain. But caps were scarce early on, so American troops still carried the older flintlock 1816 through most of the Mexican-American War. But the US Model 1842 would serve into the Civil War. It was the peak of the smoothbore. But the next giant leap had to be a more capable bullet. So it comes the deadliest bullet that changed warfare forever, the mini-ball. Wherever you get hit, say goodbye to that limb. Yes, a doctor sees you with that wound, it's game over. It was the first of its kind, and it took advantage of rifling to be more accurate. You can technically think of it as the first ever rifle, with a huge velocity increase to hit something at 100 yards. So Claude Minié's bullet was cone-shaped with a hollow base. It's smaller than a .69 caliber ball, equivalent to today's 20-gauge shotgun slug. Then the powder gas expanded that hollow base, so it gripped the rifling on the way out. But not everyone had one, so went on producing more of these powerful rifled musket, which was the 1855. What they came up with was a 3-band rifle musket with good sights and a patch box. It also used the Maynard tape primer, a roll of paper caps that fed automatically, so think of like a belt-fed primer to speed up reloading. You can say this was the baby step towards the development of semi-auto rifles, but it has a problem. Moisture can ruin the whole tape. They can misalign or even cause a chain reaction if the whole thing was lit. So it performed horribly in combat, so they panic. They made a bunch of Model 1861 for the Union, basically without the Maynard mechanism. But after the Civil War, things moved up a notch because the military transitioned to waterproof, self-contained metallic cartridges, and the technology in the 1860s was blooming. But they were too broke to buy all new guns, so instead of doing nothing with the rifles they already have, they modified them with this thing called the Allen trapdoor to basically convert those muskets into breech loaders, like this. A hinged block flips up and forward like a trapdoor. So you drop a cartridge in, close it, and fire. It started with the 50-70 and later the 45-70 government. The days of you fire a round and a brass shell coming out was this thing that started it. For the first time, a soldier could reload lying down behind cover. But the trapdoor was still a single shot firing black powder. Until a French chemist invented smokeless powder in the 1890s, this produced more power and almost no smoke. And that made the repeating bolt-action rifle possible. Like the Norwegian Krag. The Krag was America's first ever general-issue bolt-action rifle, a big step up from the single-shot trapdoor design. But the Krag was outdated almost as soon as it was adopted, because it had 2 flaws that showed in the Spanish-American War. First, you loaded it 1 round at a time through a side door, while the Spanish Mausers used stripper clips that loaded 5 rounds at once. Second, it couldn't handle a powerful cartridge, and the Spanish 7mm Mauser hit harder than the Krag. The Army had seen enough. Something had to level the playing field between the Mauser and whatever that came next. So the US military frantically cherry-picked features from both the older Spanish 1893 and the newer German 1898 designs and turned it into the American Springfield 1903. But the rifle was still using the 30 caliber round nose bullet just to match the 7mm round nose Mauser, while Germany had moved on to the pointed Spitzer bullet that outperformed the round nose bullet in every ballistic performance specs there were at that time. So that forced a panicked American army to also make a pointy projectile to level the playing field, ultimately creating the legendary high-velocity 30-06 round that fought in World War I. But it doesn't solve the rate of fire issue, and it was also very rough on the guns. So if the German came up with something advanced, then the American had to top it with firing speed, right? Well, and that wish became reality with the iconic M1 Garand. It loads 8 rounds of 30-06 in a block clip, and it can dump rounds way faster and overwhelm the Germans' 98K bolt-action rifles. Actually, the M1 Garand almost didn't make it, because it was competing with the 276 Pedersen, a round aimed at lowering recoil and damage to the rifle. But for sure the Army had fully committed to the semi-auto doctrine. But General Douglas MacArthur didn't want a new bullet, because that would most likely to botch the war effort halfway in Europe with logistics and everything. So he ordered the design to stick with the 30-06 stockpile, fight the war first, and engineering can come later as a luxury problem. And that is the man who saved the M1 Garand, the rifle that dominated the Japanese and the Germans till the end of World War II. Meanwhile, the lightweight M1 carbine was also fighting along side by side with the M1, and this was the most PDW thing there was, where paratroopers and drivers can easily deploy them. The specialized A1 version had a folding wire stock to make everything even more compact. Though it was semi-auto during World War II, then the M2 carbine during the Korean War had increased the firing rate by adding full auto with up to 30 rounds. Up until this point, only the German Sturmgewehr 44, the Soviet PPSH-41, can compete, but the M1 was just way lighter and the most portable gun at that time. However, its stopping power with just the 30 caliber round was just not getting the job done, so the military started looking for something else better again. So by now the confidence was high, and the Americans weren't going to stop this engineering momentum. By the late 1950s, the Army wanted a lighter rifle to replace the aging Garand. The result was the M14. About half a pound lighter, it was essentially an M1 Garand with a detachable 20-round mag fed directly from the bottom. But it shoots the 7.62 NATO, because following World War II, European allies, especially the British, argued that modern warfare took place at closer distances. They wanted to adopt an intermediate cartridge, like the lighter recoil 280 British on full auto. But the Americans were still obsessed with long-range capability, until close-quarter Vietnam battle taught a harsh lesson that a heavy gun shooting big bullets were just not the right tool for the job. It was later as a marksman's rifle in Afghanistan, but the M14 was also the last of the big, heavy battle rifles. Then, the next weapon set the tone for the modern arms we know very well today.
Okay, tell us how
the M16 took the opposite idea based on Eugene Stoner's AR-15 design and ran with it, so a soldier could carry a lighter gun and more ammo. At this point, the platform itself was the only one good enough to stand face-to-face with the banana clip AK. It shoots a 55-grain bullet, lighter than a nickel, and it flies 3 times the speed of sound. It's mostly made of aluminum mixed with polymer parts instead of steel and wood. On full auto, it's way easier to control. But early versions in Vietnam had serious problems like bad powder, jams, and a gun that was a nightmare to maintain in the jungle. Ever since then, the gun has gone through multiple facelifts to make it work the way it does today. The world is a different place now. Fighting doctrine has changed and newer technology has emerged. Suddenly, fighting inside buildings and tactical, surgical operations with tactical lasers and light became the norm. And the AR-15 was the platform that explored it all in depth. Now, a soldier can enter a room, totally dark, with lights and lasers attached, ready to handle business. So, going from the old M16, that looks like this, down to a snubby CAR-15, which later turned into the M4 family, that looks like this. Each one evolved from previous gripes, mixed with some mistakes along the way, like changing full auto to a burst, and then later changing it back. Then it was the SOT mod era, where you can add all kinds of accessories on the gun to make a rifle more capable. The CAR family also made huge contributions to the science of building a shorter rifle for special forces. That laid the foundation for the M4. And the lesson carried right into the Mark 18. And even the Mark 18 went through multiple iterations, mostly to the upper receiver. The M16 had 4 iterations until it stopped at the A4 version. The A2 had its barrel beefed up to fire the new M855 that can penetrate armor better than the M193, and this version was the one that replaced the full auto to a faulty burst trigger. Then the A3 and A4, with the A4 that came with a removable carrying handle, and now mounting all types of optics were possible, and that change stayed even with the M4 with the flat top pick rail. But that wasn't enough. They wanted to beef up everything, so that introduced newer magazines, suppressors, better sights, and every small little parts you can think of. And one of the biggest was the HK416's piston design. The US Marines loved that thing and had adopted it, the M27 version of course, which won't get hot in the main receiver to better achieve fire suppression. The intent was to replace some machine guns, but it ended up replacing their M16s. The Marine didn't wait for the Army, and they went with this gun on its own regardless, because it can serve as a belt-fed machine gun replacement because it can do both. During this time, it was all about making these guns more modular and more capable, like the free float rail system, to shoot more accurately in ways in the 1700s no one would ever thought this was possible. It would be insane to bring a modern M16 back to the 1775 fights. You could just wing it and still probably win the entire fight while they try throwing lead balls at you. Their jaws will drop if you entertain the idea of using a grenade launcher to completely dominate the gunfight. One rifle can probably do it way faster than 20 men shooting muskets at the same time, while you hide like 300 yards away, firing back at them with reload speed so insanely fast that they could only daydream about. All to lay the foundation for the beefed-up URGI that we see today. The military put it into hard service, and that quickly exposed what still needed fixing. During this time, there were also a bunch of programs trying to replace the M4. It was a constant dance. Keep improving the M4, or admit it might not be the platform of the future. But then they'd always end up going right back to it. We had all of these being tested, but none of them would officially replace the M4, and some only ever made it to special operations. Until recently, the Army is now fielding the SIG-X M7 in small numbers, with a new 6.8 cartridge meant to eventually replace the 5.56. It promised to deliver a harder punch against modern armor, and it's still evolving regardless how much negative opinions there are on the gun. So, from a French musket to today's carbine, that's 2.5 centuries that made the American service rifle into what it is today. If you want to dig deeper into these topics, be sure to check out these ones right here.